So I'm just going to go through a little bit about today's workshop and how Microsoft Team works. And then I'll let Rebecca get into the workshop. So if you didn't know, the OCAD Student Union is an independent and democratically run student organization at OCAD. If you are a current student or you're a recent graduate, you're a member of our student union. And being a member means that you can access any of the free programs and services that we offer, such as access to free legal services, a student advocate, grocery funds, student grants, and social events and workshops like this workshop today. For more information about how we've adapted our programming for the COVID-19 closure, I'm going to drop all of our contact information into the chat. And whether or not we are actually on campus, the OCAD Student Union operates in the Dish with One Spoon territory. And we always want to acknowledge and give thanks to the nations who have lived on and protected this territory prior to and against colonization, including the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy of Six Nations, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat nations. So today, we have our How to Get Inspired Visual Research Workshop being run by Rebecca. I'm also going to put Rebecca's social links in the chat too, in case you want to check out her website. So before we start, I just want to go over some protocol for using Microsoft Teams. So please keep your webcam and microphone turned off, just so we can minimize interruptions. Rebecca's going to set aside time for questions during her workshop. But if you want, you can also type your questions into the chat, and we can let Rebecca know that there's questions in there. And then as well, in order to better view the workshop once Rebecca starts, I would recommend just full screening your application. If you need captions turned on for the workshop, you can look for the button that has 3 dots in the call menu, and you can click this button and select Turn on Live Captions. I'm also going to put these instructions into the chat. We also want everybody to be mindful of the Student Union's Safer Space policy. So this just means that in our virtual space, it's important to still make sure you're being respectful of each other, just to listen in an open way and try not to speak for others or over other people. I also want to let everyone know that we are recording this workshop to post it to our social media later, but the chat section won't be recorded in order to maintain everybody's privacy. So the last thing is that by attending this workshop, you're also being entered into a raffle to win either a gift card prize or an art supplies prize pack. So I also want to thank Above Ground Art Supplies, which is the art store that's right next to OCAD. They're sponsoring our orientation this year and donating a bunch of awesome prize packs to us. So after this workshop, keep an eye on your student email, as you might receive a message a couple of days from now saying that you've won a prize. So at this point, I'm going to copy all of our social links and instructions about how to turn on captions into the chat, and I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Lex. Hi, everyone. Wow, so many people, exciting. I can't wait to get started, but before I do, I'd just love to hear kind of what major specialization everyone's in at OCAD or going into. Curious to know if you're all designers, graphic designers, industrial designers, or what. So can everyone just kind of, great, awesome. Yeah, keep like plugging those in. Just want to get an idea of what you all are interested in and going into. Awesome, that's exciting. Okay, so a lot of people in a lot of different disciplines. This workshop gives an example of a research mood board for graphic design, but it can be applied to kind of fine art or industrial design or environmental design or any of those things. So I think, yeah, it can be useful to you all. So I'm just going to get started. I'm going to share my presentation now. Thanks for sharing all this. Give me a sec. Okay, can everyone see this title page full screen? I can't hear you, so you're going to have to say yes. No?
I can see it. Everybody's
Okay.
saying yes. We're good.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I can't see you while I'm full screen. Okay, so I'm going to get started. So, of course, this workshop is about how to get inspired. We're going to talk about visual research and mood boards. But before I get into it, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. So as you know, my name is Rebecca. I'm a graphic designer. I'm a freelancer here in Toronto. I just graduated from the graphic design program at OCAD. And before that, I was a producer, art director, and stylist in commercial photography. So I have tons of experience working in the commercial field, but at school, I was really interested in things like type design, book design, and publications. So on the agenda today, we're going to talk about why we do visual research before we start any design project. We will look at some examples in art and design that I think are really exciting and inspiring. We'll then talk about kind of where to start and where to look when we're doing our own visual research. We'll talk about why and how to create a mood board, kind of what that's all about. And then I'll give you a quick intro to the Arena platform, which is a really great online kind of information organization tool that can be useful to kind of archive visual material and also to organize it. So first, why do we start any project with research? Like, why do we do that at all? Why don't we just jump into it with like spontaneous inspiration? Well, I think that research helps us get excited and inspired about our projects. It's really fun to see what other people are doing and to be inspired by beautiful things in the world around us. Research helps us come up with an idea for our project. Research is also really important to lay a formal and conceptual foundation for any design project. So we want to make sure our projects are like grounded in something that has been carefully thought out. Research is also super important because it actually helps us kind of situate our own work within a wider context of design and culture. So if we don't know about what's happening around us, we kind of don't know where we stand in relation to it. So I think that's a really important aspect of it. We also want to do kind of thorough, interesting research because it helps us make work that's current. So it helps us understand kind of what's of the now and what's relevant right now, but it also helps us make work that's original. So it helps us understand kind of what's out there and what's trendy so that we can make things that aren't trendy or that are different. And finally, research is important because it also helps us communicate the ideas and the references behind our work with other people. So as you enter OCAD, you'll probably understand this pretty quickly that when you start a design project, you often have to kind of either present it to the class or sit with your prof and explain kind of the idea behind it before you actually get started. And having a really good kind of basis in visual research will help you communicate your idea with your profs. And in the future, when you work with clients or you work with subcontractors or other creatives like photographers or illustrators or people you hire to help you out, having a really good foundation of visual research and a really good mood board will help you kind of communicate your vision with others. So I think it's really important for all of those reasons. Now, what we're not going to do today is do things on the internet besides using Arena. So I think we all know how to use the internet. I don't think anyone needs a workshop on how to like go on Pinterest. So I'm really going to focus on how to do research offline. Now, I'd love to hear from anyone. Actually, you know, maybe, let me think. Yeah, I'd love to hear a few comments in the chat if possible about why you think we don't want to do research online, like why we want to do, hold on a sec. Yeah, like why we would like to focus our visual research on offline options. Anyone have any ideas? You can like yell it out or put it in the chat, either is cool. Yeah, confusing. There's just so much stuff out there. That's totally true. Yeah, that's also a really good point. Yeah, plagiarism is also a really good point. We're looking to make things that are original, right? Yeah, these are all great. And you can keep sharing those. I'm just going to go back to the presentation, but it would be nice to kind of have this list afterwards to kind of look back at. So why we don't want to start our research online. So one reason for me is that I've kind of sat in on a lot of design presentations, and it often goes a lot like this. You'll have someone who stands up and they'll talk about how they're doing a visual identity for a music fest, and this will be their references. And the next student will get up and talk about their digital art speaker series, and these will be their references. And so on. So I think you get the idea. The kind of issue with doing research online is that because of the way algorithms work and because of the way things kind of trend, you tend to get a lot of the same stuff. So what I want to propose in this workshop is that we look harder, closer, and weirder at the things around us. So why do we want to look for alternative sources of inspiration? Well, as was mentioned in the chat by a few people, homogeneous sources can lead to homogeneous outcomes. So we don't want to make derivative work. We don't want to make trendy work. We want to make things that are our own. We want to look for different ways to find visual inspiration because the process of doing that can also help us discover new ways of thinking and making. And we also want to develop kind of our own way of doing visual research because we want to learn how to see things through our own eyes in order to develop our own personal vision and style. We don't want to copy other people's work. So what we don't want to do in this workshop or ever is kind of start with online research. So we don't want to like begin with a design brief and then just like open an internet window and look on Behance or Trend List. That's like what we absolutely don't want to do. What we also don't want to do is use one-to-one references. So for example, if I have a brief to design a poster for a film festival, the last thing I'm going to look at when I start my research phase is look at film festival posters. We want to look at references kind of outside of what we're trying to do. The other thing we don't want to do is we don't want to begin the research process with only formal or stylistic references. So we do want to worry about how things are going to look, but we don't want to worry about that in the beginning. We want to start with concept first. So what we do want to do in the design research kind of early stages is we want to look closer at the world around us for inspiration. We want to find inspiration outside of our discipline. So we want to look at fine art, music, architecture, the built environment, nature, etc. for our design work. We also want to research the subject matter of our project and build a conceptual foundation for our project before we start looking at style and form. And we want to make sure that we find references that are unique to our project and our own process and that aren't kind of generic trending visual material we find online. So this is maybe a little bit abstract. So what I did is I put together some examples first in art and design that I think are really interesting and inspiring and exciting. And they kind of show how different creative people think about inspiration and research in different ways. So the first examples are of artworks that are inspired by nature. So this first piece is an installation work by a British artist called Andy Goldsworthy. What's really interesting about his work and his process is he goes out into nature and he finds things around him and he creates these beautiful installation pieces in nature that he leaves there and that he later photographs. He doesn't extract those items from the environment. He leaves them there. So he's really telling a story about kind of the space and the life that is kind of in the natural environment. This is an installation piece by Japanese artist Tadashi Kawamata. I really love this because it's something that he installed. It's actually one of many pieces that are installed all over the Centre Georges Pompidou, which is a contemporary art gallery in Paris. And he's really inspired by nature too. So he has this series of kind of makeshift shacks that he constructed all over this museum that are inspired by birds' nests. So he's an architect and an installation artist that's inspired by nature as well. Now this is an entirely different reference, but I also really love it. These are 4 screen captures from a website that was created by designer, artist, and educator Laurel Schwartz. This project was a collaborative project with her students in a web class at Yale, I believe. And it's a website that's inspired by the various layers of an onion. So if you can actually go to the site, it exists now. You can Google it later. I could put a link in the chat at the end of the talk. But how the website kind of works is that you enter it and you kind of encounter these different written and visual pieces by peeling layers off of the website. And you can see there's a little bit of transparency behind where you see the kind of layer, the previous layer or the next layer. And what's really interesting is the website is actually built to kind of decompose after a certain amount of time, just like organic matter would. So I think this is just a really beautiful and interesting example of like a vegetable inspiring a web project. Very cool. So this next example, actually the example that I want to talk about is the example on the left. It's a painting by American painter Kehinde Wiley. He is really interested in kind of the art historical canon and the very like white Western emphasis of art history. And he, not only is he kind of using art history as inspiration, but it's actually his subject matter. So what he does is he takes these famous paintings from like academic style art. Sorry, that's my dog Harvey Buster barking in the background. And he kind of is subverting it by switching the subject of the painting and by kind of reappropriating it and making it his own. Similarly, Kent Monkman, famous Canadian artist, is doing a similar thing where he's really kind of critiquing the art historical canon and looking at the relationship between Native people and settler colonial people through his paintings. Another source of kind of really interesting inspiration that you almost like wouldn't expect would be inspiration is kind of the vernacular, the regular environment around us. An earlier artist to kind of really embrace vernacular design was Ed Ruscha. He was an American artist, typographer, photographer. This is a spread from his book called 26 Gasoline Stations from the early 60s. He was really obsessed by just like these crappy old gas stations, and he traveled the country kind of photographing them and essentially elevating them to the status of art by photographing them and publishing them in a book. And you can see that his kind of illustrative work and his fine artwork is very much inspired by the vernacular design that he was really interested in. So this is just a kind of close-up of one of his pastel drawings. Then there are artists that are really inspired by just like tools or processes. So I'm really obsessed with this example. I love this designer. Her name is Danielle Aubert. She's based out of Detroit, Michigan. And this is one of her earlier works. It's a book of drawings made in Microsoft Excel. What I really kind of love about this piece is that she's taking a software that's usually used by like accountants and like administrative assistants, and she's creating an artwork with this and really embracing the tool and kind of showing us the tool of design. So it's really interesting that someone could be like inspired by like the crappiest of, you know, all possible softwares. It's like the antithesis of design software, but she's making something really beautiful and interesting with that. And for that reason, I think it's really interesting. Another example of someone who's really interested in kind of process and looking at the kind of behind the scenes of design is Inez Cox. She's a Belgian designer, I believe, really known for book design and for her work in the cultural sector. And this book, Save, is really kind of about the process of graphic design. So she's looking like behind the curtain, behind the scenes of design, and almost like the kind of crappy like process aspect of it all. And I think that's really interesting as well, that someone could take inspiration from the process of the work itself. And then of course there are kind of so many other ways to be inspired in your artwork or in your design work. To the right, this large image is a render of a building that's being constructed right now in London on the waterfront. It is designed by architect Renzo Piano, who is known to be a lover of sailing, and he was really inspired by kind of the image of the sail on the horizon on the water, and this is what this building is all about. And then finally, Edward Weston, a photographer from the early 20th century, really famous for his still life photographs. These are obviously photos of kind of inanimate objects. We have a bell pepper to the left and just a shell to the right. So they're just still lives, but what I kind of really love about his work is that you could see that he is really inspired by nudes, by nude paintings and by nude photographs. And he's treating these kind of inanimate, lifeless, not lifeless, but like non-human objects in like a really kind of tender and human way. And you could see they're like extremely corpulent, they're lit like they were human beings. So it's really interesting to think that you can take inspiration from like a nude painting and take a photograph of a pepper and create something that's your own, and that's really beautiful. So those are all really exciting inspiration pieces for me. This is actually the final one. So this is an example from graphic design. These are 3 posters that were designed for a Greek film festival a few years ago. And what I think is really great about this reference is that this designer took inspiration for this work not from other film festival posters, but he took inspiration from the idea of kind of moving film itself and film kind of in a reel going through the projector. And using only typography and type treatment, he was able to really convey like a feeling of motion and a feeling of like actually having film go through a reel, which is very cool in my opinion. So those are all really great. It's fun to get inspiration from art and design. But now kind of we're at the point where maybe we're starting our own design project. We have a brief from a prof or from a client, and we're asking ourselves kind of like, where do we start and where like can we look for inspiration? So the first thing we want to do is we want to ask ourselves kind of what our project's about. What's the energy of the subject matter that we're treating or that we're dealing with? And we want to ask ourselves, do we really know enough about the subject matter to start designing it yet? And I want to read a quote by kind of an old school New York-based graphic designer that I really like. He was really pragmatic. And I heard him say this in an interview on Design Matters with Debbie Milliman a few years ago. And I'll just read it out to you. Imagine this with a super intense New York accent. So Bob Gill says, let's say I got a logo to do for a dry cleaner. Instead of sitting in my studio looking through design books to get inspiration, surprise, surprise, I thought it made sense to go to a dry cleaner and to sit there. I didn't have a definite process that I went through. I just knew I should stay there until I had something interesting to say about dry cleaning. Just to sit there, to ask questions, to see what people were doing, to look at the back of the dry cleaner, and so forth. Pretty good in my opinion. Okay, so what are some sources of inspiration that we can find online for our design work?
Someone's asking if you could go back to the previous slide, to the one before this.
This one?
I believe so.
The film festival posters?
They're saying not this one. Let's see. Which one were you saying? Is it after this or before this?
Sorry, I can't see the chat because I'm on full screen, so feel free to...
If you just skim through, just go forward, just like stay 2 seconds on each slide. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, let me know.
Next one.
Yeah. This one?
Go ahead. Next one.
Yeah.
It was the one before they wanted to see.
Oh, this one, the Edward Weston photos?
Yeah.
Great. Could someone read up the question? That'd be super helpful.
They just wanted to see the slide. We can continue.
Oh yeah, and just a heads up, at the end of the presentation, what I could do is I'll make a link to a Google Sheet, and anyone who wants to me to email them a PDF of the presentation, I can send it over, no problem. Does that sound good?
Perfect, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, sweet, no problem. Okay, so where was I? I was like, where can we look? Like when we're starting our design project, whether it's like an installation or whatever, an exhibit design or a poster or whatever, like how can we start? So I'm going to go through a few sources of inspiration that I find are useful to me offline. So the first one is like very simple. It's looking at the world around us. So I find that it can be really helpful whether I have an idea and I know where I want to look, or I'm really stuck for an idea and I have no inspiration. I find it helpful to kind of leave my place and take a walk and take a different path than I'm used to, and actually like intentionally look at the things around me. And the reason is that we kind of often don't do that. We're often going from A to B, we're looking at our phones and we're not paying attention. But there's a lot to see if you really actually do pay attention. And what I recommend doing when you kind of leave your home, or it might not even be leaving your home, it could be leaving your room, it could be going into a backyard, it could be taking a look at the alley behind your house, whatever it is, it's kind of leaving your regular space and looking at things with intention. I recommend that you do that, and while you do that, you document the things that you see around you that inspire you. And when I say document, I mean you can take like iPhone photos, you can sketch things out, you could take notes, but you want to keep those things for later, because you almost like want to have them in your back pocket and digest them and kind of return to them. I really kind of love this example. So what I'm showing you now is just a screen capture of an Instagram feed of a friend of mine whose name is Jack Curtis. He's a London-based graphic designer, I think originally from Toronto. And what I really love about his feed is it's all about the kind of like everyday vernacular lettering and typography that he sees in his life. So, you know, whether it's like a hairdresser or like an auto repair store or graffiti he sees in an alleyway, he kind of takes photos and he shares them, and it's his way of documenting and storing all of these things that he sees around him. And when you kind of get to know him as a designer, you notice that like his work is very much inspired by all of that vernacular typography. So there's a lot to be kind of taken from just looking at the things around you. So another source of inspiration that I kind of am really into, especially because I love books and book design, is looking at books. And the great thing about books is that even if you don't have a lot of money, you can access them for free. Now, I know it's kind of a COVID situation right now, but I know that Toronto Public Library is currently open with some restrictions. And then, of course, you have access to the OCAD library that has like tons of amazing resources for material and art and design and other subjects as well. I also really love going to used bookstores because they often have like all kinds of really cool like old books and magazines that are really inspiring. And one thing about looking at books is obviously there's all the material inside of them, but I think like the books themselves can be really interesting and inspiring. So these are just some like classic covers by a really famous book jacket designer, Alvin Lustig. Just like a paperback books that he designed that are super beautiful, really inspiring in terms of kind of graphic language, use of color, even typography. So book covers are a great source of inspiration. Of course, books that contain graphic design can also be really useful and really helpful. This is an example of a book that I picked up when I was studying in Berlin that contains a bunch of posters that won a poster competition that year. This is another poster competition design book. So obviously these books contain really interesting, cool, like current graphic design. But what I think is almost like even more important than the design work that they contain is kind of how they are designed. And this is something you can't necessarily find online. So when you're like holding a book in your hands and you're flipping through it, you get an idea of the paper, the way it was printed. This close-up shows kind of how this book was designed. So how this book was designed is that the main spreads contain posters, but inside, if you kind of open the French fold of the book, that's where all the information about the designer and the printing is contained. The second poster design book is really interesting because the jacket itself is like transparent and it exposes this beautiful, colorful, exposed spine that is like very much part of the book. I think the design of the book is almost as important as the contents of it. So books are great. Go check them out. You don't have to buy them. You can borrow them. You can go to the library and look through the shelves and take photos. I do that all the time when I start a design project. Okay, another great place to find inspiration. Go to the art gallery, duh. I don't think I need to explain why fine art is an amazing source of inspiration for artists and designers, but do it. As an OCAD student, you get free access to the AGO. Check out the 5th floor, the Contemporary Gallery. There's tons of great stuff there. This is just a photo from the last exhibit I saw there, which was an installation work by Berlin-based artist Hito Steyer. She's really interested in network culture and like capitalist surveillance and the internet. Really cool. Go there. It's free. Spend some time there. Take photos and archive those. Another really great source of inspiration, if you don't want to leave your house or can't leave your house, is to watch movies and television. And I know that's like kind of sounds like a weird thing to suggest because I think a lot of people think of movies and TV as just pure entertainment. But I really believe that if you're like watching the right stuff, films and television can be like an amazing source of inspiration. And they can really give us ideas about how to approach narrative pacing and rhythm. And those are things that will become really important as you do things like animate typography or make a short film or design a book or an editorial. Narrative and pacing are extremely important. Movies and TV can also be a great source of inspiration for visual composition, styling, set design, color treatment, photo treatment, lighting, etc. And let me show you some examples. I think it'll make a lot more sense now. So this is a still from a Wes Anderson film. A lot of you probably kind of know this director already. He's quite known for his production design. Every kind of frame of his films are kind of styled like perfectly, huge attention to detail, like really stylish in terms of costume and set design. And if I were approaching like a poster for a jazz festival or something, I would probably start my color research with Wes Anderson films versus looking at like a Pantone swatch on Pinterest. This is a still from a film by Barry Jenkins called Moonlight. It's a really beautiful film, also beautifully designed. But the reason I included this in the presentation is I think the filmmaker was really clever in how they used color correction to separate the chapters of the narrative in this film. So what they did is they intentionally chose film stocks from different eras that had like different color tints in order to reflect the different phases of the main character's life. So a super interesting source of inspiration for a photo project would be this film. This is a still from the film Roma by Mexican director Alfonso Cuarón. And this film is very much in a kind of classic cinematic style, obviously black and white. I really kind of love this as a reference because not only is it really inspiring in terms of the photographic treatment, but the kind of use of light and shadow and composition is extremely graphic and extremely strong and can be used as inspiration for both photography, but also graphic layout or typographic hierarchy. The final example I'll show you in this film TV category is a screen cap from The Handmaid's Tale. This is really a really dark show, but also really interesting and beautiful, extremely well shot and designed. And actually it's all shot in Toronto and Hamilton, I believe. But an amazing kind of reference for just visual composition and color. So those are just some examples to show you that there's like so much richness in television. You can just watch this stuff on your computer. I also really suggest when you're watching a film or a TV show that you find especially beautiful or inspiring that you take screen captures and that you just save them in a little folder on your desktop because you might want to go back to them at some point for a project in the future. Okay, another source of inspiration that I really like is looking at old stuff. Old printed material is really interesting because it was just made differently than the way things are made today. We mostly kind of print things on digital printers. We're designing things with software. So the things that are made today just have like a totally different aesthetic quality to them. And so I'm not saying that you should look at kind of like old stuff that you find, you know, at flea markets or in vintage stores as I'm not saying that you copy this and you make things that look old or nostalgic. I don't think like that is particularly interesting. But what I do think is interesting is seeing like how materials were treated, how people printed things, the different color combinations and typographic combinations that were used in the past. Those can be really inspiring, and they're kind of a cool way of like almost like stealing design ideas in a way that isn't plagiarizing someone's work today. And again, I don't say you kind of copy these things exactly, but you know, you might be inspired by these yellow lines on this ticket or by the shape of this label. Yeah, it's just a cool way of getting fresh design resources that other people don't have. And you can find this stuff for cheap at like honestly Salvation Army sometimes. They'll be like hidden in a book or a photo album. And the last source of inspiration that is kind of similar to the one that I just showed you, but I think is really important for any artist or designer to kind of start working on right away is to kind of collect designed things. So we're designers. We need to be interested in other design work. We need to kind of understand what's happening around us, and we need to collect these things. So what I suggest is that you find like a shoebox or a drawer or back of a closet somewhere, and you just start like collecting things today, whether it's like a free broadsheet that was kind of printed by the OCAD kind of student union, or whether it's like a flyer you find in a store or something that was sent to you in the mail. Collect the things that you think are beautiful for different reasons, because they can give you ideas about like layout, about color. And what's really important about this that you can't find online is that you're also looking at the way things are printed, the way they're folded, the way they kind of feel, the tactile kind of quality of them. So when I get to a point in any design project where I have an idea, I like to go back and look at kind of the stuff I have in my drawer for some formal inspiration once I've like kind of nailed down a general concept. So just to sum that up, some ways of finding visual inspiration offline are to go outside and see the world around you, take a look at books, visit an art gallery, check out some interesting films and television, look at old vintage stuff, and collect printed ephemera around you. Okay, so now that I kind of went over different ways of finding visual inspiration, I will talk to you about why and how to create a mood board. So does anyone know what a mood board is? I'm going to just escape for a minute and let you kind of share things in the chat if you like.
Rebecca, we had two quick questions if you want to answer those right now.
Sure, let's do it.
One question was somebody asked if you can please share the link for the Onion-inspired website.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'll do that at the end.
Okay, cool. And then somebody else was also wondering what fonts you used in your PDF presentation.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so this is Space Mono, and it's just a Google font. So I built this in just Google Presentation. It's free. I highly recommend open source and free fonts when you can. But like I said, what I'll do is I'll share a Google Sheet at the end of the presentation, and anyone who wants me, wants me to shoot over the PDF, I'll just send it out. I use the same font, represent. Cool. So I'm going to assume no one knows exactly what a mood board is, or maybe that you're not entirely familiar with them, which is why you came to this workshop. So I'll get back to the presentation if that's okay. All right, I'm going for it. So what's a mood board? I will explain now. A mood board is something that is often used by architects, interior designers, graphic designers, also kind of widely used in the fashion industry. It's essentially a collection of kind of visual material, images, drawings, text, color, etc., that represent a tone or a mood. And it's used to kind of set the tone or the stage for any creative project. Now, why would we want to make a mood board? So the first reason is to help us clarify and visualize our own ideas. So it's to concretize them, it's to collect material and put them together and see if kind of our vision makes sense. Mood boards are also useful in communicating our ideas to professors, colleagues, and clients. So often in early stages of design, either in school or in the workplace, you kind of sit down with a client or a prof, and you want to kind of show them the direction or the kind of vibe that you're going in for them to kind of approve or to give feedback on before you actually start designing things in software. Mood boards are also really helpful in order to kind of assist us or help us to stay on track with our own design. So once you've created a mood board, it's useful to kind of keep it next to you as you design to make sure you're kind of on track with your vision. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that you don't kind of adapt things as you design and as you react to kind of like the concrete elements that are developing, but it can help you kind of focus your design work. Mood boards are also helpful because they help us record and archive our references. And the reason we want to record and archive the references is because we might want to share a case study later on. I know at OCAD, especially in the design program, most profs will ask you to submit a process book at the end of a project or a semester, and you'll be graded on that. And they want to see your references. And the reason they want to see the references is they want to understand your way of thinking and your process. And they also want to kind of make sure that you're smart with how you reference work and that you're not plagiarizing the work of others. So what are the kind of main elements of a mood board? I'll go through kind of the kind of key categories that are really important to think about when you're building a mood board. So the first thing you want to think about when you're building a mood board is you want to find some content or subject matter references. So those are the really kind of first level references that deal with like what you're designing and what kind of the thing you're designing is about. So for example, like if I am designing a book about the trees of Ontario, my content or subject references might be photos or diagrams of trees in Ontario. They might be images of forests. They might be kind of woodcuts of trees in Ontario and so forth. So that's kind of the obvious stuff. But you kind of want to lay that out first as your kind of groundwork. Now, the second category of elements in a mood board that you might want to think about are conceptual references. So these are kind of more abstract references. They're not references about what your designed thing will end up looking like, but they're more about like thinking about your topic. And this will make more sense when I show you the example in a few minutes. But hopefully after you've kind of laid out your content, subject, and conceptual references, you've kind of developed an idea for your project. So that's the kind of stuff you want to do first. Now, once you've laid out your general idea for your project, then it's time to think about stylistic references. So those are kind of references that express a tone or a mood or a vibe, like the energy of the thing that you want to design. So for example, if I want to create a typeface that's kind of spooky and about like the occult, I might have an image of like a scary haunted house as a mood reference, even though my project isn't about photography, it's about tech. And then kind of the last and almost like the most important element of a mood board are your formal references. And those are really like concrete references about what your project's going to look like. So when you get to this stage, you already have a concept, you have an idea for your project, you have an idea of kind of the style or the tone. And then you want to think about things like the format. Is it long? Is it wide? Is it a book? Is it a poster? What the materials are, like, are you using like matte paper? Are you using glossy acrylic? Is it made out of metal? Do you want natural materials like wood? This is a really good point to start thinking about color. So you don't need to know your exact kind of precise colors, but you want to think about, you know, are you using neons or are you using pastels? Is it muted or is it bright? You might want to consider things like type and photo treatment. What style of typography are you using? Do you want it to look really kind of cool and edgy and punk, or does it need to look really classic and old school? Are your photos analog or digital? Again, this is a stage where you want to think about general approaches to graphic treatment. Is it illustrative? Are you using simple shapes? You might want to think about some ideas for layout and grid, and even start thinking about like binding or finishing. Is your thing folded? Does it have a spiral binding, etc.? So all this is really important, but I think this will make a lot more sense when I show you an example. So we're going to look at a quick example of how we would approach the process of creating a mood board for a design project. In this case, I'm going to give you an example of a graphic design project. So I found this really cool design project for an art book fair in Hong Kong. It wasn't designed by me. It was designed by Studio Darius Wu. I thought it was really cool. So this exercise is me essentially kind of imagining what this designer might have gone, what their kind of research process may have been when they were given this brief. So the first thing as a designer I would want to do when I'm designing something like an art book fair in Hong Kong is I would want to situate myself in that place. So I would want to think about, okay, what does that city look like? What is it all about? The Hong Kong Art Book Fair is a bilingual art book fair, so I want to look at the signs of Hong Kong, how they're, in English and in Cantonese, to get an idea of like the feeling of the place. I'd also probably want to visit the art book fair if I could and take some photos and see what's there. If I can't visit in person, I'd want to take a look at what it, looks like online. And then I might want to look at some art and design books, and I might want to look at some design books that deal with the subject matter of kind of life in Hong Kong. So that's like my kind of first level references. Those are kind of like laying the foundation for the rest of my visual research. Once I've done that, I want to go a little deeper and think more abstractly. And I want to get maybe like a little bit weird and esoteric about it. So I want to think about maybe like, what does it mean to see? What does it mean to look at art? What are some kind of symbols and mythology that relate to the idea of like two languages or duality? Maybe I want to think about the process of reading, what it's like to kind of process written information in our brains. What is it like to touch a book? And then I might want to think about, what is an art book versus a gallery space? Is an art book like a printed form of a gallery space? Like, what's that all about? Do I want to visit a gallery? Should I look at images of contemporary art galleries? So this is kind of the stage where hopefully like I am developing an idea for my project. So once I have an idea, maybe I have like an idea of the kind of concept behind it. I have an idea of kind of the objects I'm going to make for my project. I want to start thinking about stylistic references. So I might start thinking about kind of the style of Hong Kong, the style of that city. What are the neon lights like? Like, what are the colors of the nightlife of Hong Kong? Maybe I'm really interested in creating something that feels really current and like really fast and contemporary. And maybe what exemplifies that is like a crazy sports car. Because it's an art book fair and it's very much about like form, maybe I want to look at references outside of graphic design and art, and I want to think about something like fashion. So what is the kind of fashion that's happening in that space and time? And what's the built environment like? What are the interior spaces like? What is the lighting like? So these are all kind of images that really reference a mood more than kind of a specific form or a concept. So once I've done that, I want to start with formal references. So I'm kind of cheating here because I actually read an interview with the designer. But why I show this is the designer in working on the Hong Kong Art Book Fair identity was really inspired by kind of the round shape of a book. So that's kind of their point of departure. They're looking at these kind of rounded shapes as like a kind of foundation of the formal design of the visual identity. So now I'm at the stage where I'm looking at like specific formal references. So I'm not designing yet. I'm still looking at references for my mood board, but I may start thinking about graphic treatment. So I may want a simple graphic treatment with a very thin line weight, which is what you see in the example here. I then might start thinking about materials. So since I looked at my kind of mood and stylistic references, I know I want like glossy, shiny, metallic things that connote like the future. I also might start thinking about kind of layout or hierarchy. Do I want to have like big, bold type? What's that going to look like? I may want to think about binding for my printed materials. I certainly want to start thinking about typographic style. So I may not be kind of ready to choose a typeface yet, but I may know that I want something that is serif typeface, but it's also contemporary and kind of thin. and kind of cool and artsy looking. So I might start exploring those. I may also start thinking about color. So as you saw earlier, we referenced some images of these neons. So I know that I want like at least kind of one warm punch color, and I may start thinking about what are complementary tones or kind of supporting colors for that. And the last stage is essentially for the mood board is you kind of take the key references from those various kind of elements and stages of mood board building, and you combine them together to kind of express like a look and a feel and a tone. And essentially, you know, this isn't exactly the most exhaustive example, but I wanted to put something together that was simple enough that we could all look at kind of in one frame on one screen. But it gives you an idea of kind of the feel and aesthetic. And if we look at the final design, I hope that you see that there is like some connection between the mood board and the final design. So the purpose of this mood board is really to inform the design work you do later. And a mood board can exist kind of, you can make it online, you could create it in a PDF, it could be a bunch of images taped to the wall in your room. Like that is really not important, but I think what's important is like to convey all these various elements. Yeah, in order to inform your design work. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly show you and run you through a platform I really love called Arena. If you've ever used Pinterest, it works in a kind of similar way, but it's kind of way better. And what's cool about Arena is you can share and save not just images, but also videos, PDFs, and links to full websites. And I use it all the time when I'm working on my own projects and also when I'm working collaboratively, because it's a platform that allows you to kind of share things with collaborators or friends. So if you're like working on a group project at school, you might want to all start a channel. So a channel is essentially kind of like a section on Arena that you create where you can upload images, and you and your kind of colleagues and friends can upload images. So as you can see here, I've already uploaded a few. I highly recommend that you kind of name your images and reference them so that you can go back to them later and know like kind of who took the photograph or who designed whatever thing you're referencing. I haven't done it, but I recommend you do that. And then, so what's really cool is when you're using Arena, you can like just drag and drop images from a desktop that you've saved. So I can just like do this. Sorry, it's loading. And then I can add a description, like I could say like, love this fashion reference. Cool, great. And then that'll be there. You can have notes on your blocks. You can also upload full PDFs. So this is like a full text PDF that I have. So if you have actual like research that you want to keep in the same kind of container as your images, you can just like drop a PDF and then download it later, or the people you're collaborating with can download it, which is really cool. And the last thing I kind of like, well, actually, it's going to take a sec. But I'll continue. You can also share like full websites. So I could go to, for example, the Toronto Art Book Fair website, just copy the URL. Sorry, let's let that load. Almost there. I guess it's a heavy PDF. Cool, so you can see it there and you can download it if you're like somewhere else, not at home, working from school, whatever. And you can also, like I said, share entire websites, which is really kind of fun and useful, especially when your research is, when you're researching actual websites or website functionality.